Hello and welcome. We're here to walk you through some of the key stories making headlines today.
Yes, we'll try to cut through the noise and give you the essential information on quite a range of global events.
Let's start in Canada, unfortunately, with some terrible news out of Vancouver.
Yeah, really awful. A car ramming attack at the Lapu Festival, which is a celebration of Filipino culture there.
And the casualty numbers are just staggering.
They are. The death toll has risen to 11 now, with dozens more wounded.
Do we know anything about who did this or why?
Well, police have a 30-year-old suspect in custody. Reports say he has a history of mental health issues. Importantly, they don't currently believe it was terrorism.
But the motive is still unknown.
Exactly. The victims, tragically, ranged in age from just 5 years old up to 65. The community, especially Vancouver's large Filipino community, is just reeling.
I can only imagine.
Right.
Over 140,000 Canadians of Filipino descent live there.
Right, and the acting police chief, Steve Rye, he called it the darkest day in the city's history. There are vigils being held. RJ Aquino from the Filipino BC organization spoke about the grief and confusion.
And the timing, just before the federal election.
Yes, that's added another layer. Prime Minister Mark Carney canceled some large rallies. Other leaders have, of course, expressed condolences.
Was there any warning? Security concerns beforehand?
Apparently not. A threat assessment was done before the festival, and it found no elevated risk. The street where it happened had food trucks, but there weren't any barriers in place.
Just awful. Okay, moving to the Middle East now. An Israeli strike in Beirut.
That's right. Israel targeted what they described as a Hezbollah store of precision-guided missiles. This was in Beirut's southern suburbs, an area known as Dahia.
Precision-guided. So more advanced weaponry.
Exactly. Missiles capable of hitting targets much more accurately. This is the first strike like this in nearly a month, so it's definitely putting pressure on the current ceasefire.
How has Lebanon responded?
The Lebanese presidency condemned it immediately and called on the U.S. and France, who helped broker that ceasefire, to intervene.
And Israel's justification.
They claim the missile storage violated agreements and posed a direct threat. Prime Minister Netanyahu's office basically doubled down, saying Israel won't let Hezbollah grow stronger militarily.
The UN must be concerned.
Yes, the UN Special Coordinator for Lebanon expressed serious concern about this renewal of violence in a region that's been trying to find some stability.
Elsewhere, on the diplomatic front, there was an interesting meeting in the Vatican.
Yes, Donald Trump met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. This happened just before Pope Francis's funeral.
Any details on what they discussed?
Not much publicly, but afterwards, Trump did question Vladimir Putin's desire for peace, pointing to the recent strikes on Kyiv.
That sounds different from some of his earlier comments, doesn't it?
It does. Previously, he'd suggested Zelensky had no cards to play, and even seemed to blame Ukraine, partly for the war starting.
How are allies reacting to this and the broader peace discussion?
Well, Germany's defense minister, Boris Pistorius, specifically warned Ukraine against making territorial concessions. He called Trump's previous suggestions about that basically capitulation.
And Ukraine's position hasn't changed?
No, they've consistently rejected giving up territory. They insist on a ceasefire first. Meanwhile, the Kremlin has said Putin is ready for direct talks, quote, without preconditions.
Okay, let's shift gears quite a bit. The Kim Kardashian jewelry heist trial. That was years ago.
Nearly 9 years, believe it or not. The trial for 5 men allegedly involved in that 2016 Paris robbery is finally starting.
Remind us what happened there.
It was at the Hotel de Portales. Thieves broke in, tied her up, and stole millions in jewelry. Then they made this rather low-tech escape on bikes and on foot.
It captured a lot of attention at the time.
Oh, absolutely. KJ Matthews, an entertainment journalist, mentioned how people are still fascinated by it. But crime reporter Patricia Turin-Show pointed out some blunders the burglars made, like dropping some jewels as they fled.
Any idea how they targeted her or planned it?
Court documents suggest a couple of things might have played a role. First, Kardashian's own online sharing of her location and jewelry. Second, possibly information from someone who provided her transportation. A man named Gary Madar.
And the stolen items. That huge engagement ring.
Never found. Most of the jewels are believed to have been melted down or broken up and sold off pretty quickly. Turisho actually described the gang not as elite criminals, but more like, quote, elderly down-and-out thieves.
Interesting. Okay, let's go back to the Middle East, Iran this time. A major explosion.
Yes, a very large explosion at the Shahid Raji port in southern Iran. That's near Bandar Abbas.
How significant is that port?
Hugely significant. It handles something like nearly 80% of Iran's imports. So this is a major disruption.
What's the situation now?
Fires are still blazing, apparently, and there's a toxic cloud over the area. Schools and offices in Bandar Abbas were closed, and a day of national mourning has been declared.
What caused it? Is there any blame being assigned?
It's already turning into a bit of a blame game internally. Ambry Intelligence, an analysis firm, suggested it might have been improper handling of a shipment of solid fuel intended for use in Iranian ballistic missiles.
Wow, okay. Any other theories?
The customs office suggested maybe a fire just started in a storage area for hazardous materials. Authorities initially warned about food shortages because of the port disruption, but they've since tried to downplay that.
Any international response?
The Kremlin actually offered specialist firefighting aircraft to help.
Right. Let's move over to the South China Sea now. Tensions rising there, too.
So, reports say the Chinese Coast Guard seized Sandy Cay. It's a tiny, tiny sandbank in the Spratly Islands, which are, disputed territory.
How did the Philippines react?
They responded pretty quickly by landing personnel on 3 other sandbanks and released a photo that kind of mimicked China's typical images. It's not entirely clear if one of those landings was actually on Sandy Cay itself, though.
So a direct challenge.
The Philippines reported what they called an illegal presence of Chinese vessels. The U.S. weighed in, calling the reports deeply concerning and warning against actions that could threaten stability.
And the timing here is interesting, too, isn't it?
Yes, this happened right as the U.S. and the Philippines were conducting their joint Balikatan military exercises. That's Tagalog for shoulder to shoulder. These drills often simulate responses to potential conflicts in the region.
It's part of that larger dispute over the South China Sea.
Exactly. China claims the vast majority of it based on its historical nine-dash line, which other countries in the region and international law dispute.
Okay. Some sad news from the entertainment world now.
Yes, the passing of Bianca Castro Arabejo, much better known as Jiggly Caliente, a real star from RuPaul's Drag Race and a prominent figure in the drag community.
What did her family say?
Their statement highlighted her infectious energy, fierce wit, and unwavering authenticity. She really made a mark on Drag Race, but also had acting roles. You might remember her in Broad City or Pose.
And she was an advocate too, right?
Yes, she publicly came out as transgender back in 2016. Her passing follows what was described as a serious health setback recently, which unfortunately led to the loss of most of her right leg, a real loss for the community.
Definitely. Let's turn to Greenland. There's been talk again about the U.S. wanting to buy it.
Well, not exactly talk of buying it now, but Greenland's Prime Minister, Mutborg Edged, felt the need to reiterate that Greenland is not a piece of property. This follows Donald Trump's past suggestions, about purchasing the island.
So Greenland is pushing back on that idea firmly.
Absolutely. Although, interestingly, both Greenland's Foreign Minister Nielsen and Denmark's Prime Minister Frederiksen have said they are willing to meet Trump for talks.
What's the dynamic there? Greenland and Denmark.
Greenland has been controlled by Denmark for about 300 years. It governs its own domestic affairs, but foreign policy and defense are handled by Copenhagen. Nielsen emphasized they want a strong partnership with the U.S., but based on respect.
And the U.S. interest isn't new, is it?
No, the U.S. has had security interests there for a long time, a military base since World War II, and there's likely growing interest now in Greenland's potential rare earth mineral deposits.
What do people in Greenland actually want?
Polls generally show they want independence from Denmark, but they don't want to become part of the U.S.
Understood. And related to recent events, Pope Francis has now been buried.
Yes, he was laid to rest in a private ceremony. It took place at the Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore in Rome.
Wasn't that his specific wish?
Apparently so.
Yep.
Reports say he expressed that wish back in 2022, inspired by his devotion to the Virgin Mary. Thousands of mourners have already been paying respects at his tomb.
The funeral itself was a major event, I assume.
Oh, yes. Attended by heads of state, government representatives, monarchs from around the world. Cardinal Giovanni Battista Re gave the homily, emphasizing Pope Francis's message of building bridges, not walls. And that meeting between Trump and Zelensky we mentioned earlier happened just before the funeral began.
Right, okay. Shifting focus to South Africa now, there seem to be some tensions with the U.S.
Yes, growing tensions. The ANC national chair, Gwed Mantashe, has been quite vocal defending South Africa's sovereignty.
What's the core issue?
It largely stems from U.S. criticism of South Africa's new land expropriation law and also broader comments on race relations.
What did the U.S. say specifically?
Trump signed an order suggesting the law could be used to, quote, seize ethnic minority Afrikaners' agricultural property without compensation. President Ramaphosa insists the law is about ensuring equitable land access for all South Africans.
And that U.S. order had another component, too.
It did. It opened the door for Afrikaners potentially being admitted to the U.S. as refugees based on this land issue.
How is that playing out within South Africa?
Mantashe was particularly critical of South African citizens, who apparently called on Trump to punish the country over the law. There's also been talk, Mantashe suggested integrating the town of Orania, which is known as a sort of Afrikaner separatist enclave. And tensions have flared up on social media too, like on Elon Musk's platform X regarding land ownership.
Have they tried to smooth things over?
South Africa appointed a special envoy to Washington, specifically to try and ease these tensions.
Okay. Staying with history for a moment, a significant anniversary related to World War II.
Yes, the 80th anniversary of the liberation of the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp.
A name synonymous with unimaginable horror.
Truly. Commemoration events were held, attended by survivors and their families. The accounts from the liberation by British and Canadian troops are just harrowing, finding 13,000 unburied corpses and around 60,000 survivors, many near death.
We hear survivor stories, like Mala Tribich and Esther Alice, describing the sheer scale of death and suffering.
And what made Belsen perhaps different from some other camps was that it was found largely intact. The witnesses, the perpetrators, the victims, they were all there when the Allies arrived.
It wasn't primarily an extermination camp like Auschwitz, was it?
No, there were no gas chambers. People died from deliberate cruelty, starvation, disease, and massive overcrowding, especially in the final chaotic weeks of the war as prisoners were marched there from camps further east.
How was the anniversary marked?
With solemn commemorations, remembering those who died. Wreaths were laid by veterans and dignitaries. Because the huts were burned down after liberation to stop the spread of disease, very little of the original camp actually remains today.
A somber remembrance. Let's turn back to the present conflict in Gaza. Any movement on ceasefire talks?
There are some, maybe, tentative signs. Turkey's foreign minister said Hamas appeared more receptive lately to negotiating a lasting ceasefire.
What would that involve?
Hamas itself suggested it could consider disarming, but only as part of a long-term deal that includes a full Israeli withdrawal from Gaza.
Are mediators optimistic?
The Qatari prime minister expressed pretty low optimism, frankly, citing a lack of a common objective between the sides. But a Hamas delegation did hold talks in Cairo recently, focusing on both the ceasefire and the humanitarian crisis.
Is there any talk about who governs Gaza after the fighting stops?
A Palestinian official mentioned that Hamas has signaled readiness to hand over governance to some kind of Palestinian entity. The U.S. has been pushing for a reformed Palestinian Authority to take charge post-war.
But Netanyahu is against that.
Yes, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has ruled out a PA role and remains opposed to a Palestinian state altogether. In a related move, PA President Mahmoud Abbas recently named a deputy within the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO.
Okay, a lighter note, perhaps. Something about the Titanic.
Yes, quite a story. A letter written by a Titanic survivor, Colonel Archibald Gracie, just days before the ship sank, has sold for a record amount at auction.
Wow. What did it say?
It was dated April 10th, 1912. He described the Titanic as a fine ship and wrote that he would await my journey's end.
He survived the sinking.
He did, remarkably. But sadly, he died later that same year, reportedly due to injuries and exposure sustained during the disaster.
And the price?
It fetched £300,000, about 5 times what was expected. An anonymous buyer snapped it up.
Incredible piece of history. Now, back to the U.S., a concerning immigration case involving a child.
Yes, a federal judge expressed strong suspicion, his words, that a 2-year-old U.S. citizen, identified only as VML, was deported to Honduras without proper due process.
How did that happen?
The child was apparently apprehended along with her mother and sister during a scheduled immigration appointment in New Orleans.
What's the official line?
A Department of Homeland Security spokesperson said the mother wanted to take her children with her, but the judge was told that making a phone call to speak directly with the mother in Honduras wasn't possible, which raised flags.
And the judge's stance?
Very clear. He stated plainly it is illegal to deport a U.S. citizen and scheduled a hearing for May 19th to get to the bottom of it.
This isn't the first time something like this has come up, is it?
No, there was a similar case in Florida involving a Cuban woman and her U.S. citizen husband, and it comes amidst reports of thousands being detained since Trump returned to the White House. There was also the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, An El Salvadoran national mistakenly deported, highlighting the legal complexities.
Okay, let's look north again to the Canadian election campaign. You mentioned the tragedy in Vancouver affecting it, but there's been a bigger shift too.
A really stunning reversal, actually. The Liberals, under Mark Carney, are now polling neck and neck, or even slightly ahead of the Conservatives led by Pierre Poilievre.
What caused such a dramatic change? The Conservatives had a big lead.
A lot of analysts are pointing to Donald Trump's recent rhetoric about, threats of tariffs and things like that. It seems to have really mobilized left-of-center voters, uniting them behind Carney.
So Carney, who's relatively new to politics, benefited.
It seems so. He gained a lot of prominence specifically by responding forcefully to those U.S. trade threats. Poilievre and the Conservatives, who were riding high initially, seem to have struggled to adapt as the political landscape shifted because of this external factor.
But the underlying issues in Canada haven't gone away.
No, definitely not. That sense of Western alienation, particularly in provinces like Alberta and other regional divides, are still major factors. And the smaller parties, like the NDP and the Bloc Québécois, might be facing seat losses in this new dynamic.
Interesting times up north. Moving south to Brazil, a sentence handed down related to post-election arrest.
Yes, a Brazilian hairdresser, Deborah Rodrigues, was sentenced to 17 years in prison.
17 years. For what exactly?
For involvement in the unrest that followed former President Bolsonaro's election loss. She was convicted specifically of being involved with a criminal organization that was aiming to launch a coup.
Did she admit to anything?
She admitted to writing, "You lost, idiot," in lipstick on a statue during the riots, but she denied taking part in any violence.
How is this being viewed in Brazil?
It's quite divisive. Bolsonaro supporters see her as a victim of political persecution, and Bolsonaro himself is also facing criminal proceedings over that whole alleged coup attempt.
Okay, back to Gaza and the humanitarian situation.
Yeah.
You mentioned ceasefire talks, but what about aid getting in?
It's dire. The UN World Food Program, the WFP, says it has now completely run out of food stocks inside Gaza.
Completely depleted. Why?
Because of the Israeli blockade, which has been ongoing now for about 7 weeks, the very last of their remaining food was just delivered to kitchens providing hot meals, and even those are expected to run out extremely soon.
What's the UN saying about responsibility?
The UN is clear. Israel, as the occupying power, is obligated under international law to ensure essential supplies reach the population. Israel disputes this, often saying there's no shortage or that Hamas diverts aid.
What about basic things like bread?
All the bakeries supported by the WFP have had to close. No flour, no fuel.
Is aid waiting to get in?
Yes, a huge amount. Over 116,000 tons of food aid is apparently positioned, ready to go if the borders reopen. The WFP is trying desperately to keep those hot meal kitchens going, but they only reach about half the population and can't meet full nutritional needs.
Have other countries reacted to the blockade?
The UK, France, Germany have all criticized it. Israel has rejected the criticism, repeating claims about Hamas hijacking aid. And complicating things further, Hamas recently rejected the latest ceasefire proposal.
A truly desperate situation. Let's turn back to the U.S. A judge arrested in Wisconsin.
Yes, Judge Audrey Dugan was arrested on charges of obstruction and concealing an individual to avoid arrest.
What are the specifics?
The charges stem from an incident where she allegedly helped a Mexican national, Eduardo Flores Ruiz, evade ICE agents.
Yeah.
Flores Ruiz was facing misdemeanor battery charges and had been previously deported. He was eventually apprehended later.
This sounds politically charged.
Very much so. It immediately sparked partisan reactions. Democrats tended to criticize the arrest as an attack on the judiciary, while the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, defended it, citing obstruction of justice. There was a somewhat similar case in Massachusetts a few years ago involving a judge accused of helping an undocumented immigrant avoid ICE in a courthouse.
Okay, now for something almost unbelievable. A town hall threw away an Andy Warhol.
It sounds like it, yes. A Dutch town hall in Uden has admitted they, most likely, accidentally disposed of 46 artworks during a renovation, and yes, one of them was apparently an Andy Warhol print of Queen Beatrix of the Netherlands.
How on earth does that happen?
Well, the artworks were put into storage during the building work. A subsequent report found they were stored carelessly, ownership wasn't properly tracked, and when they went missing, not enough action was taken. Basically, a failure of process.
Lack of guidelines, it seems.
Exactly. No clear rules for registration, storage, conservation, or security. The artworks were probably just taken away with the regular trash.
Do they know the total value?
The estimated value for all 46 pieces was around 22,000, so not astronomical, but the Warhol print itself is obviously significant. It was part of his Reigning Queens series. Interestingly, other Warhol prints have been stolen and later abandoned in the Netherlands before.
Still, quite a blunder. Let's shift to Sudan. The humanitarian situation there sounds catastrophic.
It really is. An aid agency is warning that people, particularly in the Darfur region, are resorting to eating charcoal and tree leaves just to survive.
Eating charcoal, that's the
That's
best
it.
part.
Utterly. This is happening as people flee fighting near the Zamzam camp between the Sudanese army and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, the RSF. People are reportedly dying of thirst during the flight.
What's happening at Zamzam camp?
The RSF attacked it, forcing tens of thousands to flee. Many had lived there for years. There are horrific reports of bodies left on the road and widespread sexual violence against civilians trying to escape. The city of El Fasher is now the last major army holdout in Darfur.
The scale of this conflict is immense, isn't it?
Devastating. An estimated 150,000 people killed, 13 million displaced. And the UN has had to cut food aid due to funding shortages, making things even worse.
Are there ethnic dimensions to the violence?
Yes, the RSF, which is drawn largely from Arab militias, is accused of deliberately targeting non-Arabic residents. The UK government described their actions as displaying the hallmarks of ethnic cleansing.
What are the specific concerns from rights groups?
The UN human rights chief is extremely concerned about collapsing aid systems, attacks on medical workers and water sources, and, again, the rampant sexual violence. Zamzam camp itself has reportedly been burned down. Nearby towns like Tawila are completely overwhelmed with displaced people. And fighting is raging in other areas too, like West Kordofan, with many civilian casualties.
A horrific, underreported crisis. Turning back to U.S. politics, what's the state of the Democratic Party right now?
They seem to be struggling, frankly, struggling to find a unified message to counter Trump's agenda. There are visible fractures within the party in Congress and among supporters. There's no single clear leader rallying everyone.
Is this reflected in polling?
Yes, a recent CNN-RS poll showed that over half of Democrats feel the party leadership is actually moving in the wrong direction.
What do Democrats want their leaders in Congress to do?
The majority want them to actively try and stop the Republican agenda rather than seeking compromise.
Are there figures trying to energize the base?
You have figures like Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez doing their Fighting Oligarchy tour, trying to mobilize people around economic issues. But there's this ongoing debate within the party. Should they moderate to win swing voters or lean left to fire up their base?
And the age question is still there.
Definitely. There's a lot of discussion about the need for a new generation of leaders to step up. You even see public debates like the one between David Hogg at the DNC and the veteran strategist James Carville over the party's direction.
Okay, let's return to South Africa, but a different story this time, financial abuse.
Yes, a really powerful story gaining traction. A South African doctor, Dr. Saliu Ndaba, she's using her maiden name, now sparked a national conversation with viral videos about her experience.
What did she share?
She alleged significant financial exploitation by her estranged husband, linking much of it to his desire for a luxury car, a Mercedes-Benz specifically.
What's striking about her story?
It highlights how financial abuse isn't just about poverty. It can affect successful, educated women. Her story resonated deeply, and the comment section on her social media basically became a support group for others. Her estranged husband did respond on TikTok, denying the accusations.
How is financial abuse defined in this context?
Experts explain it as a tactic of domestic violence using money to control or exploit a partner. It's legally recognized as such in South Africa. People shared stories of partners controlling all finances, taking out loans in their name, leaving them in financial ruin.
Are there underlying psychological factors?
Yes, experts talk about the abuser's need for control and sometimes feelings of inadequacy, while the victim might be manipulated through love or fear. Some research even suggests women who out-earn their male partners can face a higher risk of intimate partner violence. There's also discussion about a double patriarchy faced by Black women in some contexts.
Is there advice being given?
Yes, practical things like maintaining separate bank accounts, securing PINs, and having open conversations about finances early in a relationship.
A really important conversation. Back to Sudan, unfortunately. Another loss related to the conflict.
Yes, Sudan's National Museum in Khartoum has been looted and badly damaged during the fighting between the military and the RSF.
What kind of damage? What was taken?
Museum officials found shattered display cases, bullet casings everywhere, and clear evidence of looting. Precious artifacts, including items from its gold collection, are gone.
Is it known who did it?
Sudanese officials suspect the RSF took the valuables, possibly even smuggling them to the UAE, although they haven't provided concrete evidence for that destination. The UN had previously warned countries against importing Sudanese artifacts precisely because of this risk.
Was anything done to protect the collection?
Ironically, many treasures had recently been boxed up as part of a rehabilitation project, which might have actually made them easier to steal.
This feels like more than just looting.
Government officials and analysts certainly see it that way. They accuse the RSF of deliberately trying to destroy Sudanese identity and history by targeting cultural sites like the museum. And sadly, this mirrors the experience of countless ordinary Sudanese whose homes have been occupied and valuables stolen during this war.
Just tragic. Let's look again at Canada, specifically Western Canada. You mentioned Western alienation earlier. Is that gaining traction?
It seems to be yes. Calls for separation, particularly in Alberta, are definitely getting louder.
What's driving it now?
It's a combination of ongoing frustration with the federal Liberal government's policies, especially environmental ones affecting the oil and gas sector. And again, those comments from Donald Trump about Canada seem to have added fuel to the fire for some. This Alberta sovereignty movement is becoming more vocal.
Do they feel closer to the U.S.?
Some proponents explicitly say they feel more cultural similarity with U.S. states like Montana or Texas than with Eastern Canada. Veteran politician Preston Manning even warned Western secession could be a real possibility if the Liberals win the next election again.
How widespread is the support for actual separation?
It's important to note that most Albertans do not currently support full separation. However, the sentiment, the Western alienation, is real and being taken seriously. Some are even openly discussing the idea of Alberta joining the U.S., and one activist is apparently planning a fact-finding trip to Washington, D.C.
It highlights a deep divide.
Absolutely. Bridging that east-west divide will be a major challenge for whoever becomes Canada's next prime minister.
Okay, let's look at a claim about government savings in the U.S. The DOGE agency.
Yes, our correspondent Verify took a look at claims made by the DOGE agency, operating under Elon Musk's influence, about achieving massive savings for the government.
What did they claim?
They claimed a staggering $160 billion in savings. However, the analysis found that less than 40% of that figure was actually itemized with any detail.
And the itemized savings, did they check out?
Only about half of those itemized savings could be backed up with any supporting evidence. The analysis also found accounting errors in DOGE's own reporting.
Can you give some examples?
They looked at the largest claimed savings things, like a contract for migrant facilities, an IRS IT contract, a defense IT contract, and a U.S.-side grant to Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance. In several cases, the accounting seemed questionable, or verification just wasn't possible.
What about the Gavi grant?
Gavi explicitly denied that their grant had been terminated, directly contradicting DOGE's claim of savings from cutting it.
So the bottom line.
Basically, due to the lack of evidence and transparency, it's impossible to independently confirm the vast majority of the $160 billion in savings claimed by the DOGE agency.
Right. Let's return to Rome one last time. How is the city reacting now after the Pope's funeral?
The atmosphere is described as quite hushed, actually, less about intense mourning or celebration, and more reflective.
So a sense of contemplation.
Exactly. The main street leading to the Vatican, the Via della Conciliazione, was reportedly quiet. Observers noted the presence of the city's homeless population nearby, a group Pope Francis often championed.
But people were still paying respects.
Oh yes, tens of thousands filed past his temporary resting place in St. Peter's Basilica before the private burial. Pilgrims came from all over the world. Some seemed joyous, celebrating his life, others more somber and reflective.
And the focus shifts now.
Yes, preparations are underway behind the scenes for the conclave, the secret meeting of cardinals to elect the next pope.
We touched on the funeral earlier. Was it very different from past papal funerals?
It was described as simpler, following Pope Francis's own wishes. But, you know, a papal funeral is still a papal funeral, a major spectacle steeped in ceremony and tradition.
What did that involve?
Archbishops and bishops gathered early at the Vatican. Officials had expected at least 250,000 attendees, including around 170 heads of state or government representatives. Prince William represented King Charles III, for example.
Even the dress code is specific, right?
Oh, yes. Specific instructions for the clergy bishops in albs, chasubles, and simple mitres. cardinals wore more ornate miters. It was all broadcast live around the world, of course.
Okay, let's talk technology.
Yeah.
Humanoid robots, are they getting closer to reality?
There's definitely a race on to develop useful humanoid robots. We saw a demonstration recently of Unitri's G1 robot at a trade fair in Germany.
What's notable about the G1?
It's smaller and significantly more affordable than some others we've seen. It moves quite fluidly, though it was being controlled remotely. But the humanoid shape itself really seems to engage people.
What are the potential uses?
The big hopes are for applications in the workforce doing repetitive or dangerous tasks, and eventually perhaps as domestic appliances in our homes.
But there are still hurdles.
Big ones. Balancing strength with safety around humans is tricky. And the AI isn't quite there yet for complex, unpredictable tasks. Unitary is mainly marketing the G1 to research labs and tech companies for now.
Who are the big players in this race?
Well, Elon Musk's Tesla is developing Optimus, aiming for factory work initially. Other car makers like BMW and Hyundai through Boston Dynamics are also exploring them.
Where is most of the development happening?
Many analysts believe Chinese companies are likely to dominate this space eventually. They have the supply chains, the tech ecosystem, and strong government support. Unitree itself is Chinese, and their G1 is priced relatively cheaply at around $16,000. Investment is heavily flowing towards Asia.
Is anyone else competing?
There are others. A Bristol-based company, Kinesi, is launching its KR1 robot, though it's being manufactured in Asia. A key challenge for everyone is developing the sophisticated software needed for smooth human-robot interaction.
So when can I expect a robot butler?
Probably not for a while yet. The idea of an everything robot for the home is likely still maybe 10 to 15 years away, according to most experts.
Okay, let's go back to Gaza, but focus on the aftermath of rubble. There's a hidden danger there.
A very significant one. Asbestos. With the sheer scale of destruction, there's a huge risk of asbestos exposure from the building debris.
How much are we talking about?
The UN Environment Program estimated that up to 2.3 million tons of rubble in Gaza could be contaminated with asbestos.
What are the health risks?
When asbestos materials are damaged, tiny fibers are released into the air. If inhaled, they can cause serious lung diseases years, even decades later. These include asbestosis, which is scarring of the lungs, and mesothelioma, a particularly aggressive form of lung cancer. Even small amounts can be dangerous over time.
And it must be hard to avoid inhaling dust in that environment.
Extremely difficult, especially in such a densely populated area with so much destruction. People are focused on immediate survival, finding food, water, shelter. The long-term risk of asbestos isn't top of mind, and protective gear is scarce or non-existent.
Was asbestos known to be present in Gaza buildings before?
Yes. Previous UN surveys after earlier conflicts found asbestos in debris, including a highly carcinogenic type called crucidolite, or blue asbestos. Many countries have banned asbestos, but its use was common in construction materials for decades.
Are there other risks from the dust?
Yes. Silica dust from pulverized concrete is another major respiratory hazard, potentially causing silicosis. All this dust can also increase the risk of infections and worsen existing conditions like asthma. Think about the health problems faced by 9/11 first responders from the World Trade Center dust cloud. Similar concerns apply here on a massive scale.
So reconstruction will be incredibly complex.
Absolutely. Managing the asbestos safely during cleanup and rebuilding will be a huge, hazardous, and costly challenge.
Let's talk about resources. Australia is making moves regarding rare earths.
That's right. Australia announced plans to establish a national reserve of critical minerals, specifically including rare earths.
Why the focus on rare earths?
They are absolutely crucial for modern technology, electric vehicles, wind turbines, smartphones, and advanced weapons systems. The move is largely seen as an effort to counter China's dominance in the market.
How dominant is China?
Extremely. China currently controls about 90% of the global refining capacity for rare earths.
And China has restricted exports recently.
Yes, those restrictions are viewed partly as retaliation against U.S. tariffs, but also as a strategic move to control supply. The U.S. is heavily reliant on China for these imports.
So Australia wants to step in.
They aim to supply their own domestic industries and provide a reliable source for international partners like the U.S. and Europe, who, experts say, kind of dropped the ball on securing their own rare earth supplies years ago. Even Elon Musk noted China's restrictions are affecting things like humanoid robot development.
Can Australia realistically replace China?
Australia is investing heavily in mining and starting to build refining capacity, but they'll still be reliant on China to some extent, especially for processing in the near term. China, for its part, criticizes the U.S. trade approach and says it wants cooperation with Australia. Australia is definitely highlighting its resource capabilities to the U.S.
But full independence from China is unlikely soon.
Experts believe Australia can become a major player, but completely replacing China's role in the complex rare earth supply chain, particularly in refining, is a very long-term, difficult goal.
Okay, one last look at Gaza, focusing on the internal dynamics. Is there dissent against Hamas?
Yes, reports indicate growing anti-Hamas sentiment and even some open protests within Gaza.
What are people saying?
Many Palestinians are reportedly blaming Hamas for provoking the current crisis and the immense suffering it has caused. Protesters have been heard chanting for Hamas to leave Gaza.
Is it dangerous to speak out like that?
Extremely dangerous. Hamas has a long history of suppressing dissent, sometimes brutally. There's the reported case of Odeh al-Rubai, a protester who was abducted and killed, allegedly by Hamas forces after speaking out.
Are people resisting Hamas in other ways?
There are eyewitness accounts of residents actively preventing Hamas militants from operating within their neighborhoods or near civilian infrastructure like schools and hospitals, telling them to stay away. Some protesters have reportedly been shot and killed by Hamas forces for doing so.
So the anger isn't solely directed at Israel.
For some Gazans, definitely not. There's deep anger directed at both Israel for the bombardment and blockade and at Hamas for its actions and governance. It suggests Hamas's grip on Gaza might be showing some cracks, though it's hard to gauge the full extent under current conditions.
And finally, with Pope Francis gone, speculation is turning to his successor.
Inevitably, yes. The choice of the next pope will shape the direction of the Catholic Church and its 1.4 billion members worldwide.
Are there frontrunners being mentioned?
Several names keep coming up. Cardinal Luis Antonio Gokim Tagle from the Philippines is often mentioned. He's seen as a moderate pastoral figure, sometimes called the Asian Francis.
Any other key candidates?
Cardinal Fridolin Ambongo Basungu from the Democratic Republic of Congo is another. He represents the rapidly growing church in Africa, is seen as culturally conservative, but a fierce advocate for the church's role in society. And Cardinal Peter Turkson from Ghana, who's been considered a potential pope before, known for his energetic presence and focus on social justice issues, though also holding traditional views on some social matters.
So a real possibility of the first African pope in over 1,500 years.
It's a distinct possibility, reflecting the demographic shift in global Catholicism towards Africa. However, there are concerns sometimes raised about a lack of senior African clergy in top Vatican positions, and whether unconscious biases could play a role in the conclave.
Does Francis's legacy influence the choice?
Significantly, Pope Francis appointed the vast majority of the cardinals who will actually vote in the conclave, the cardinal electors. That suggests a degree of continuity might be likely, but conclaves are notoriously unpredictable.
One last point on global trade tensions. China's strategy in the trade war with the U.S.
China has several cards it can play. Its economy is huge and can absorb some tariff impacts. It has a massive domestic market it can focus on.
And the political system plays a role.
Yes, the authoritarian nature of the regime means it arguably has a higher pain threshold when it comes to public opinion compared to democratic countries. They can also appeal strongly to nationalist sentiments. Plus, analysts suggest China has learned Trump's blinking points from past rounds, like when he paused tariffs after negative reactions in the U.S. bond market.
What about those critical minerals we discussed?
That's a major lever. China can restrict exports of things like rare earths or other critical minerals like antimony, which is vital for batteries and flame retardants. Given their dominant position, especially in refining, this can significantly impact U.S. companies reliant on those materials.
So a complex picture across the globe today.
Absolutely. From local tragedies and political shifts to major international conflicts and technological races, trying to stay on top of it all is certainly a challenge.
Indeed. We hope this roundup has given you a clearer picture of some of the most important developments. Thanks for joining us.